Lesson 3, Life in Brazil. Today we're going to take a look at the people and places, people and culture, and what contemporary Brazil is like. So what is it like to live there today? What I'd like you to focus on as we're reading is completing the guided reading activity. You'll notice in the first section, it asks us to complete the following statements about the Brazilian people and the places that they live. In the second section, here people and culture, it says use your textbook to answer these questions about Brazil's culture. And in the last section, complete the table by listing the steps Brazil has taken to address each of the following challenges. One way to get familiar yourself with the way in which Brazil has grown and developed and what it's like today is to click and watch this video. It's about 7 minutes long, and it's going to show you how recent developments and changes have happened in Brazil's overall economic activity and how that's changed its culture and changed its life for a lot of the people. I'm not going to watch that video in the course of this video. I'd like you to just watch that on your own. So click this, click play. You'll see how somebody with a 4th grade education became the president of Brazil and changed some major things in their country. Pretty impressive. We begin. People and places. Our guiding question, what cultures are represented by Brazilians? With some 200 million people, Brazil is the world's 5th largest country in population. Only China, India, the United States, and Indonesia are home to more people. About half of all South Americans live in Brazil. Brazil's diverse population. Brazil is a mix of several cultures. Many people have a combination of European, African, and Native American ancestry. Many of these are Portuguese origin or immigrants from Germany and Italy. To a lesser degree, people came from Russia, Poland, and Ukraine. Sao Paulo, in particular, has a diverse population, including a large Japanese community. Nearly 40% of Brazilians have mixed ancestry. This is largely because marriages between people of different ethnic groups have been more acceptable in Brazil than in many other countries. The largest group of multi-ethnic Brazilians are persons with European and African ancestors. People of European and Native American ancestry are a smaller group. The smallest multi-ethnic group is of persons of African and Native American descent. About 4 million Africans had been enslaved and brought to Brazil by the 1800s. Many escaped into the hinterland, the often remote inland regions far from the coast. The Africans lived there with the indigenous Native Americans or formed their own farming communities. Today, about 80% of Brazilians live within 200 miles of the Atlantic coast. After slavery ended, many formerly enslaved people left their homes and settled in their agricultural areas or towns. The Northeast, however, still has Brazil's highest African and mixed populations. They also form the major population groups in coastal cities and towns north of Rio de Janeiro. Most Brazilians of European descent live in southern Brazil. Indigenous Native Americans live in all parts of the country. The Amazon rainforest holds the greatest number, but about half of Brazil's Native Americans now live in cities. Crowded cities. For most of Brazil's history, the majority of Brazilians lived in rural areas, mainly on plantations or farms or in small towns. In the 1950s, millions of people began migrating to cities to take jobs in Brazil's growing industries. By 1970, more Brazilians lived in urban areas than in rural ones. Today, 89% of Brazilians live in and around cities. Sao Paulo, Brazil's industrial center, is one of the world's largest cities. Some 17 million people live in its metropolitan area, or the city in the built-up areas around the central city. The central city is the largest, most important city in the metropolitan area. Sao Paulo and Brazil's other large cities look much like large cities in the United States. Skyscrapers line the busy downtown streets. Cars and trucks jam the highway in the mornings and evenings as people travel to and from their jobs. People work in office buildings, shops, and factories. Many own their own small businesses. Here's a look at what some of those coastal cities look like. They've got the massive skyscrapers right near the Atlantic coast, and they're very well developed in those inner city areas. But other parts of their country are not as well developed, and those would be the favelas. Many middle-class urban dwellers live in apartment buildings. Others live in small houses in the suburbs, which are largely residential communities on the outskirts of cities. Wealthy Brazilians live in luxury apartments and mansions. Most of Brazil's large cities also have shanty towns called favelas. Favelas are makeshift communities located on the edges of the cities. Favelas arose as millions of poor rural Brazilians with few skills and little education migrated to cities to seek better lives. These people could not afford houses or apartments. Instead, they settled on the land they did not own and built shacks from scraps of wood, sheet metal, cinder block, and bricks. Some favelas lack sewers and running water, and in many, disease and crime are very widespread. Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro have the most and largest favelas. Rio has about 1,000 of them. About one of every three of the city's residents live in a favela. Rio officials have tried to deal with this problem by offering favela dwellers low-cost housing in the suburbs, but many do not want to move because of the long commute from the suburbs to the jobs in the city that would take them hours. Taking a look at our reading activity, let's answer these questions. Brazil's diverse population includes people with ancestors from, it mentioned, Europe, Africa, Asia, and indigenous people. So obviously the European settlement of Portuguese, when the Europeans were traveling to this area, the Treaty of Tordesillas gave this portion to the Portuguese instead of the Spanish, so you've got that European influence. You've got the African influence based on the slave trade that was happening, and you've got people from other parts of the world, including Asia, that came. Now you have a mix of all these people in terms of their population today. Brazil's largest African population and mixed populations are in the northeast. They live in coastal cities and towns north of Rio de Janeiro, just based on where those settlements are. Most Brazilians of European descent live in southern Brazil from its historical tradition. And number 4, indigenous Native Americans live in all parts of the country. Today, 89% of Brazilians live in or near cities. You have a massive movement in about the 1950s to 1970s of people living in rural farming areas to more developed cities because of the jobs. About 17 million people live in or near Sao Paulo, the largest and most important economic city in Brazil. 7. Most of Brazil's largest cities have shanty towns called favelas where poor people live in shacks made of wood, sheet metal, cinder block. Those are the big, huge blocks, and smaller bricks. They make their house out of what they can find, not usually what they can buy, because they're some of the poorest people in the world, in especially this part of the world. In Rio de Janeiro, one of every 3 people lives in a favela. That's one of those makeshift shantytown homes that are outside of the city. Often don't have different types of running water or sewer. They're places where you've got really, really terrible living conditions and a lot of times crime that's involved in those areas. In the next section, we're reading about the people and culture in Brazil. People and cultures. What is it like to live in Brazil? Brazilians get along well for a country whose population includes such a variety of racial and ethnic groups. This is largely due to Brazilians' reputation for accepting other people's differences. Personal warmth, good nature, and getting along are valued in Brazilian culture. These attitudes and behaviors are an important part of what is known as the Brazilian way. Tensions exist in Brazilian society, but they involve social and economic issues more than ethnic or cultural ones. Ethnicity still plays a factor, though, because Brazilians of European origins have often had better educational opportunities. They hold many of the better jobs as a result. Ethnic and language groups. Until the late 1800s, nearly all European immigrants to Brazil were from Portugal. After slavery ended, large numbers of Italians arrived to work on the coffee plantations. During the same period, settlers from Germany started farming colonies in southern Brazil. In the early 1900s, the first Japanese arrived and worked in agriculture in the Brazilian highlands. Many of the descendants moved to cities. The first Middle Easterns, mainly Lebanese and Syrians, arrived at the same time. They became involved in the commerce in cities and towns around the country. The diversity of Brazil's people has given the country a unique culture. Portuguese is Brazil's official language, and almost all Brazilians speak it. Brazilian Portuguese is quite different from the language spoken in Portugal, however. In fact, many Brazilians find it easier to understand films from Spanish-speaking countries in South America than films from Portugal. This is because Brazil's main ethnic groups have introduced new words to the language. Thousands of words and expressions have come from Brazil's indigenous peoples. Dozens of Native American languages are still spoken throughout Brazil. Religion and the arts. About 2/3 of Brazilians are Roman Catholics, but only about 20% attend service regularly. Women go to church more than men, and older Brazilians are more active in the church than younger. Most of the rest of the Brazilian population follows the Protestant faith. Those who practice Islam and Eastern religions, such as Buddhism, are growing in numbers. Many Brazilians blend Christian teachings with beliefs and practices from African religions. Other African influences on Brazilian culture include foods, popular music, and dance, especially the samba. Brazilians blend samba rhythms with jazz to introduce the world music called bossa nova. Several Brazilian writers have gained world fame for their books exploring regional and ethnic themes. Brazilian movies and plays also have gained worldwide attention. Each February, Brazilians celebrate a 4-day holiday called Carnival. Millions of working class and middle class Brazilians spend much of the year preparing for it, making costumes and building parade floats, and nearly all city neighborhoods are strung with lights. Rio de Janeiro's Carnival is the largest and is world famous. Elaborately costumes, Brazilians ride equally elaborate floats in dazzling parades. They are accompanied by thousands of costumed samba dancers moving to the lively music. Rural life. Family ties are strong in Brazil. Family members usually live close to one another. They hold frequent reunions or gather at a family farm or ranch on the weekends and holidays. Life in rural Brazil has changed little over the years. Most rural families are poor. They work on plantations or ranches or on their own small farms. They live in one or two room houses made of stone or adobe. There's or clay bricks and are dried and hardened in the sun. Their chief foods are bean, cassava, and rice. A stew of black beans, dried beef, and pork is Brazilians' national dish. Urban life. Many city dwellers are too poor to and they eat of a similar diet. For those who can afford it, U.S. fast food chains are rapidly expanding in large Brazilian cities. In general, people in the industrial cities of southern Brazil have a better life than people in more of the rural northeast. Life in Brazil cities moves at a faster pace. Government services and modern conveniences are available there. Many workers have good jobs and enjoy a decent quality of life. Most middle class families have cars. Poor families rely on buses to get to work and to the beach or to the countryside on the weekends. Soccer, or football, is Brazil's most popular sport. It is played nearly everywhere on a daily basis. Matches between professional teams draw huge crowds in major cities, and Brazil's national team is recognized as one of the best in the world. People and culture. What is the Brazilian way? It was described as the attitude and behavior of warmth and getting along. It's people not judging other people based on their differences, but accepting that we have differences and still being kind to them. It's kind of like what you would say as in American terms of culture, like Southern hospitality. If you've ever traveled to the South and somebody's been really kind to you, that's called Southern hospitality. The Brazilian way is this attitude and behavior of warmth and getting along and good nature to people, even if they're different than you. Number two, what is the official language of Brazil? That would be Portuguese because of the settlement of Portuguese. And you have now, because of the connection to the native languages in Brazil, Portuguese actually sounds a little bit different here in Brazil than it does actually in Portugal. Number three, what is the most common religion in Brazil? Well, along with the language, the Portuguese people brought the Roman Catholic faith as the foundation for their settlement here and the mission work that began at that time of settlement long, long ago in the colonial period. There still is that Roman Catholic presence, but there are other religions of people who have traveled and migrated here, like the German influence and the Asian influence have brought their own religions as well. Number four, what other religions do people follow in Brazil? We just mentioned Protestant, Islam, and Buddhism. Number five, what is Carnival? Carnival is the famous 4-day holiday celebration that happens every single year, and it's world famous because of the way in which it is just this elaborate, exuberant celebration in the Brazilian culture. The massive amount of time that's put into costumes and lights and decorations and dancing. It's a wonderful, wonderful expression of their culture and celebration that people travel from around the world to experience in their major cities. Number six, what is the national dish of Brazil? It said that a stew of black beans, dried beef, and pork is what they're going to eat in most of their dishes or as their common meal. Number seven, what is one way that life in Brazil's cities is different from life in the country? Well, you could probably answer a number of different ways, but what I would like you to focus on is life in the city moves at a faster pace. If you want something, it's more convenient to just run to the store to get it and to have to think about, well, I should plan out my travel because I have to go this many more miles and it'll take me this much longer. Life in the city is a lot more rapid, a lot quicker because you have a lot of those modern conveniences right there at your fingertips. Where in the rural areas, you're more distance from these things that you might need, so you've got to be more strategic in planning those things out. Life isn't as fast-paced. There isn't that huge, mad rush to get from place to place or to do things. You can kind of more live at leisure with the time and the space that you have in those rural areas. Number 8, what's Brazil's most popular sport? That would be soccer, or football as they call it. Contemporary Brazil. We're going to take a look at the different types of challenges facing Brazil and the steps that Brazil has taken to address each of these challenges. Again, if you go back and watch that video at the beginning of the lesson, it's going to be helpful for you to understand what they've already done as you read through this section. What challenges does Brazil face? Brazil has the world's 7th largest economy. It ranks among the leaders in mining, manufacturing, and agriculture. These activities have produced great wealth for some people in a growing middle class. However, only 10% of Brazilians receive about half of the country's income, while the bottom 40% receive only 10% of the total income. At the same time, 1 in 10 Brazilians is forced to live on less than $2 a day. Imagine that. You get $2, that's all you get to spend on food for the entire day. About 1 in 5 workers is employed in agriculture, mainly on large farms and ranches owned by corporations or wealthy Brazilians. So one of the issues, even if they have this budding and booming economy, is that there's this huge separation between the wealth of those who are wealthy and the poor nature of those who are extremely poor. There's a huge divide based on how much money those people are making and how much money those people are living on. Brazil is a member of several organizations designed to promote free trade. Mercosur, established in 1991, is South America's leading trade bloc. In 2008, the leaders of 12 South American nations created the Union of Southern American Nations to allow for that free trade to continue. Education and earning a living. Education is an important key to success in Brazil. College graduates earn twice as much as high school graduates do, and high school graduates earn 4 times as much as those with little or no schooling. School is free up to age 17, yet 60% of Brazilians have only 4 years of schooling or less. These people have a hard life. They work long hours for low pay. In 2011, the government launched Brazil Without Poverty, a program aimed at raising the standard of living and improving access to education and healthcare. Seeking to create a skilled workforce, Brazil's government is trying to improve education at all levels. It has increased funds to build better primary and secondary schools. At the university level, Brazil has introduced Science Without Borders program, which aims to send thousands of students to universities abroad, including to colleges in the United States. Now, why would they want to do that? If they have people who are not taking advantage of the free education in their country, they want to promote that education, especially at the higher levels. Once they get this infrastructure built so that they've got really good elementary schools, really good high schools, so they want to get people through those, they then want to send them to some of the most accredited colleges in the world, the most esteemed colleges, and then if they have sent those people there, they're thinking, well, they'll come back to Brazil and bring their knowledge with them. That's why they have this program Science Without Borders, which they're going to send students to other countries into other universities. Then they'll come back to Brazil and bring their knowledge with them because they've obviously taken the government's aid in order to go and make that education happen. Connection and challenges. Improving citizens' quality of life, just one of the challenges facing Brazil. The government is sponsoring a program to colonize the country's sparsely populated interior. Several highways have been built across the country. The most important is the Trans-Amazonican Highway from the coastal city of Recife to the border with Peru. To relieve poverty and overcrowding, poor rural Brazilians have been offered free land in the Amazon if they will develop it. Thousands have followed new roads into the Amazon basin to take advantage of this offer. Brazilians also have worked to develop the energy resources the country needed to continue economic development. Large power plants along several major rivers use water power to produce most of Brazil's electricity. In the 1970s, the high cost of oil caused the government to develop a program that substituted ethanol, a fuel made from sugarcane, for gasoline. Recent discoveries of oil and natural gas on Brazil's coast provide the country with the energy it needs. Oftentimes, a country that is in a poorer state, if it finds some type of energy resource that allows it to produce and have a lot more money in its economy, because those are highly valuable resources not only for that country itself, but for other countries in the world as well. Environmental concerns. Programs to develop Brazil's interior have resulted in great concern for the future of the Amazon rainforest. Logging has long been a problem as trees are cut down to sell as wood. The Trans-Amazonican Highway and other new roads have increased the destruction by making it easier to get into the rainforest and to get the logs out. So here's an example of one of those major roads that's been built into the interior of the country. The farmers, ranchers, miners, and other settlers the roads have brought into the region have become cause for even greater concern. About 50% of the rainforest is already gone, and the rate of its deconstruction has attracted worldwide attention. It is easier to think that good soils must lie underneath tropical rainforests. However, this is often not true. The heat and moisture of the area keep the nutrients in the biosphere, that is, in the living organisms, particularly the plants, As a result, the soil is poor. When the forest is cleared for farming, the soil cannot support crops. Now, it might be beneficial for you to go and reread through that section to identify specifically these challenges and the steps taken to address these challenges. The first was 60% of Brazilians have 4 years of schooling or less. So education has not been something that has been increasingly important for people, especially in low income and low economic status. What's the country doing to improve education for the people and saying, hey, you want to go to school, you should go to school, here's the benefits of going to school. It mentioned that there are benefits in terms of how much money you make. I think 4 times as much money when you have a high school education and 2 times more than that, so 8 times more money if you've got a college education. What is Brazil doing to improve the likes of education in their country? Secondly, cities are overcrowded and many people live in rural areas, live in poverty. How are they expanding where people are living into those rural areas and then connecting those people in rural areas to different types of economic opportunity? I think that was in the section that we just read through. Lastly, the country needs energy resources for continued economic development. That was in this last paragraph as well. How do they have the ways in which they're going to produce different types of energy resources right here? The country needs economic development, large power plants, and or electricity coming from water, and they recently just found oil and natural gas. So putting those 2 sections in your own words will help you answer what they're already doing to solve those issues in Brazil. Thanks for following along with me, and thanks for having your guided reading activity taken care of. God's blessings.